TIFU by accidentally getting my coworker fired and almost losing my job in the process. So this happened a while ago, but I've been too embarrassed to share it until now. I work in a pretty standard office job, and we have a small, tight-knit team of about 10 people. Everyone gets along well, and there's a general sense of camaraderie among us. But, as you may have guessed, this story doesn't end well for me. It starts with me trying to be a good guy, and, well, everything's spiraling out of control from there. It all began on a Monday morning. I was running a bit late, as usual, but managed to get into the office with just enough time to grab a coffee before settling down at my desk. I work in the marketing department, and my coworker, let's call him Sam, works in sales. He's a nice guy, but not exactly the most tech-savvy individual. For some reason, he always had trouble with emails. Something as simple as replying to an email seemed to throw him off. I've seen him struggle to attach files, misplace email threads, and even accidentally send a blank email to clients. But despite this, Sam is well-liked because he's hardworking, always smiling, and pretty good at what he does overall. People didn't seem to mind his small tech hiccups because he made up for them with enthusiasm and a positive attitude. On that particular Monday, Sam came over to my desk looking a little more stressed than usual. He asked if I could help him with something, and of course, I agreed. It turned out that he had just sent a pretty important email to a major client with the wrong file attached. I won't bore you with the details of the email itself, but it was a situation where if the client saw the wrong file, it could cause some serious problems. Sam was in a panic, trying to figure out how to retract the email. He was like, "I've already sent it. I don't know how to get it back. Can you help me?" Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the whole undo send feature in Gmail, but it's a lifesaver in situations like this. The trick is that Gmail gives you a few seconds to unsend an email after you hit send, and once that window closes, you're out of luck. Sam didn't have that feature enabled, though, and he had already sent it 5 minutes before walking over to my desk. But I figured I'd try to help anyway. I told Sam to relax and just send another email with the correct file. That's when the first mistake happened. Instead of just sending the email, I made a very rookie move. I went ahead and sent the email and attached the wrong file again, thinking I could just correct the mistake and send new email. But I made a terrible decision. While I was trying to compose the follow-up message, I hit send on my own email draft without realizing I'd sent it with the wrong file. At this point, both Sam and I are now in a panic. Not only has Sam sent the wrong file, but I've now contributed to the mistake by doing the same thing. So, I quickly ran to my manager's office, hoping she could help us figure out how to fix this mess. She looked at me like I was insane. "You've both sent the wrong file to the client?" she asked in disbelief. I nodded sheepishly, and that's when she dropped the bomb on me. "You need to call them right now and apologize. Tell them that there was an issue with the email, and we'll resend the correct version. Do not let this slide." Now, I don't know about you, but I've always hated phone calls. They stress me out, especially when they're to clients I don't know that well. Still, I knew I had to suck it up and do what needed to be done. So I called the client, apologized profusely, explained the situation, and promised to send them the correct file immediately. The client was understanding, but I could tell that the whole situation had made them uncomfortable, and I felt like an absolute idiot. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a moment, feeling defeated. That's when I looked over at Sam. He was looking at his computer with a weird expression on his face, and it took me a second to realize that his email app was still open. That's when I noticed that he had sent the same wrong file to the client again. He had completely forgotten to attach the corrected file in his follow-up email. Now, you might think that's the worst of it, but here's where everything goes from bad to worse. Sam went on a short break to cool off, and while he was gone, I took the opportunity to try to clean up the mess. I thought, okay, I've got this. I'll fix it once and for all. So I wrote another email to the client, explaining that Sam had made a mistake, and I was the one who sent the wrong file again, in a roundabout way, obviously. Then I attached the right file and hit send for what felt like the 100th time. And that's when the trouble started. Apparently, there was some kind of issue with the email system, and my email never went through. I waited for a response from the client, but instead, I received an error message saying that the email couldn't be delivered. In my panic, I checked the recipient's address. It was correct. I tried again. Same result. By this point, Sam returned from his break and saw what I was doing. He got an email notification that the email didn't go through and, in a moment of stress, assumed I had somehow messed things up. He stormed into our manager's office and reported that he couldn't get the corrected file to the client because the email system was broken. Long story short, my manager didn't take it well. She immediately escalated the issue, and the higher-ups were called in to deal with the situation. There were emails back and forth all day, and eventually it was determined that the email system had indeed malfunctioned, but it wasn't entirely my fault. However, the damage had already been done. Our relationship with that client had been severely impacted. Here's the kicker. After the whole mess had been sorted out and the client had finally received the correct files, Sam was called into the HR office. Apparently, there were some serious complaints about his performance, and this incident was the last straw. He was let go from the company that afternoon. Now, I'm not saying that the mistake was solely my fault, but I definitely feel responsible. If I hadn't gotten involved, Sam might have caught the mistake sooner, or at least he wouldn't have been caught up in the mess I created. I feel absolutely terrible about it to this day, and it's been a huge learning experience for me about how small actions can spiral into massive problems. To make matters worse, Sam was a good guy. He didn't deserve to be fired over this, and I'm still kicking myself for not just leaving it alone and letting him handle it. He was a better fit for the job than I'll ever be, and now, every time I think about the situation, I cringe. So, that's the story of how I accidentally got my coworker fired and almost lost my job in the process. Please, learn from my mistakes. Sometimes the best way to help is to stay out of it. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by accidentally texting my mom a photo of my junk instead of my girlfriend. So, this happened a few days ago, and I'm still cringing about it. I had a rough night and need to vent about my absolute failure. It all started with a mix-up that I should have seen coming, but in the heat of the moment, I completely lost my grip on the situation. Here's the story. I've been texting my girlfriend all day, and we have been getting pretty steamy. We're in a long-distance relationship, and sometimes things get a little risque. We were talking about how much we missed each other, and after some flirting, she sent me a suggestive message that got me thinking. Without going into too much detail, it was clear she was ready to take things to the next level. I, being a gentleman, or at least trying to be, decided to send her a photo as a response. You know, one of those I'm thinking of you moments, but with a bit more, enthusiasm. So like any sane person in their early 20s, I whipped out my phone, took the picture, and hit send. Now, this is where things started to spiral out of control. I was in the middle of a conversation with my girlfriend, and I had my phone on Do Not Disturb, so I wouldn't be interrupted by random notifications. I had already gotten a few messages from friends and family that day, but I didn't feel like checking them. Everything was going smoothly until I realized I had forgotten to turn the volume back on after the last time I put my phone on mute. So I was just about to send the photo when I quickly scrolled through the contact list to make sure I had selected my girlfriend's name. Unfortunately, in the heat of the moment, I made a fatal error. I didn't realize that I had accidentally selected my mom's contact instead of my girlfriend's. So I sent the photo without checking once more to confirm the recipient. I hit send, and for a second, everything seemed fine. My phone didn't buzz or vibrate like it usually does when I send a message. I was expecting a quick, OMG, that was hot, from my girlfriend, but nothing came. I thought that was a little odd, but I brushed it off. I figured she might have been busy, or it might have been one of those times when she takes a minute to respond. Then my phone buzzed. I picked it up, thinking it was my girlfriend finally sending her response. Instead, it was a message from my mom. My heart sank as I opened the text. It read, "Son, what is this?" My stomach dropped. I instantly realized what had happened. My blood went cold. I froze. It was too late to unsend it. I had already sent the photo of my enthusiastic self to my mom. I wanted to die right then and there. I quickly responded with something like, "Oh my God, no. That was meant for, never mind, but I knew there was no saving this. My mom wasn't one to beat around the bush. She texted me back almost immediately. Are you okay? This is not something I ever wanted to see, and I think you might need to rethink your decisions here. The next few minutes were a blur of me trying to salvage whatever dignity I had left. I frantically tried calling my girlfriend, but she didn't pick up. In the meantime, my mom kept texting me, asking me questions like, "What's going on?" and "Are you all right?" I could barely respond, let alone explain that this was a huge mistake. Eventually, I had to call my mom. I don't even remember the details of the conversation. I was sweating bullets, and I think I was mumbling through the whole thing. She wasn't mad, but I could tell she was deeply uncomfortable. She kept saying things like, "I don't know what to say, and this is not appropriate for a mother to see." I kept apologizing over and over, trying to explain that it was a mistake. "It wasn't for you," I said, voice cracking. "I swear it was for my girlfriend." There was a long silence, and then she replied, "Well, maybe you should be more careful next time." Yeah, no kidding, Mom. I wanted to crawl into a hole. I tried to explain to her that it was a simple mix-up and that I didn't mean to send that image to her. She laughed awkwardly, I think out of pure discomfort, and said, just don't send pictures like that to anyone. Ever. Please." At this point, I was so embarrassed that I could barely hold a conversation. I just wanted the ground to swallow me whole. After a few more awkward exchanges, I hung up, my face redder than I thought possible. Then, to make matters worse, my girlfriend finally called me back. She had been asleep when I sent the photo, and when she woke up to my frantic messages and missed calls, she assumed something had gone terribly wrong. I tried to explain the whole situation, but it was just as awkward with her as it was with my mom. She laughed it off, but I could tell she was a little weirded out, too. "You really need to check who you're sending things to," she said, trying to keep things light. I didn't know if I should be relieved that she wasn't mad, or if I should have been more concerned about how much this had scarred both of us. In the days that followed, I kept getting texts from my mom that were vague, but definitely pointed. "How's everything going?" she'd ask, followed by some comment about making better decisions and learning from this. My mom, being the mom she is, made sure to remind me that this was a huge mistake every time we spoke. I learned a few valuable lessons here. 1. Always double-check your recipient before sending any photos. Actually, just don't send those types of photos at all. 2. Never assume your phone's "Do Not Disturb" setting is going to prevent you from accidentally messing up your life. 3. If you're ever thinking about sending anything that could be awkward to your family, just don't. 4. And lastly, if you ever do mess up this badly, the best you can do is apologize, hope for the best, and pray that it never comes up in family gatherings. I'm still trying to move past the embarrassment, but I know that from now on, I'll be extra careful about who I'm sending things to. TIFU by accidentally sending my ex a confession letter meant for my current partner. So this happened a couple of days ago, and I'm still cringing so hard that I'm questioning my existence. I need to get this off my chest, but I'm not sure if I should just laugh about it or cry. Anyway, let me tell you the tale of how I accidentally sent a super embarrassing confession letter meant for my partner to my ex. To give you some context, I, 28M, have been in a relationship with my current partner, Emma, 26F, for about 6 months. We're in that stage where everything feels new and exciting, and we have those deep, vulnerable conversations about our feelings. Over the past few weeks, I've been wanting to write Emma a heartfelt letter. Not just a casual, "I love you" note, but a real confession of how much she's meant to me, how she's changed my life, and how lucky I feel to have her. Sounds sweet, right? Well, it was sweet. It was supposed to be sweet. But unfortunately, my attempt to be sentimental quickly turned into one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. It all started when I sat down at my desk to write the letter. I wanted it to be personal, so I started typing it out in a Word document, pouring my heart into every line. I was really taking my time, carefully choosing my words, making sure it sounded genuine. At one point, I started talking about how, before I met her, I didn't think I could ever feel this kind of love again. How I was in a place where I just resigned myself to being alone. And then Emma came into my life and made everything better. I was really proud of what I was writing, to be honest. It felt so right, and I was excited to finally give her something so meaningful. But as the letter grew longer and I got deeper into my feelings, my mind started to wander. I mean, it wasn't just that I was writing a letter to Emma. I had been reflecting on past relationships too. I'm not one to dwell on exes, but my breakup with my previous girlfriend, Sarah, 27F, was still fresh in my mind. We broke up about a year ago after a long and messy relationship. It wasn't a bad breakup per se, but we'd had a lot of unresolved issues, and I had been holding on to some of that baggage for a while. I had a habit of journaling my thoughts, so when I was writing this letter to Emma, my mind drifted back to some of those old, unfinished emotions I had towards Sarah. I started writing about how much I had grown since then and how much the end of that relationship had taught me. And before I knew it, I was writing all these feelings about Sarah, about how I had missed certain aspects of her, and how, for a while, I had thought I might never get over her. But then Emma came into my life, and it was like a breath of fresh air. I wasn't trying to romanticize my old relationship with Sarah, but I guess I inadvertently let some of that emotion spill into the letter. It was a strange mix of feelings that I thought might be helpful to share, considering the context of my own personal growth. In hindsight, I probably should have stopped after the first paragraph, but I kept going and I really went all in. I finished the letter, proofread it a couple of times, and thought, this is it. This is the perfect confession letter. Now, here's where things get messed up. So, being a little old-fashioned, I decided to print the letter out rather than just send it digitally. I wanted Emma to have something tangible. I put it in an envelope, sealed it up, and felt a sense of accomplishment. But I didn't want to just hand it to her in person. I thought it would be a nice surprise if I mailed it to her. We lived in different neighborhoods, and I thought the little touch of a letter in the mail would be more special than just handing it over in a rushed moment. The thing is, in the back of my mind, I also had a bunch of other unfinished letters and journals that I'd written to Sarah. They were filled with similar reflections, but I never got the chance to actually send them. I kept those letters on my computer in a folder that was labeled personal for privacy. I don't know why I kept them all this time. It just felt like I couldn't fully get rid of them. So when I sat down to prepare my letter for mailing, I was opening up a folder of my personal writing, which is where things went wrong. In my defense, I don't know why, but I had Sarah's contacts saved in my email as Sarah X. So, while I was looking for the right email to send the letter to Emma, I accidentally clicked on her contact. The thing is, I didn't notice this at first because the name on my screen was just Sarah X. I thought it was just my general email contacts popping up. I didn't realize the disaster I was about to unleash. I then attached the letter and clicked send without really double-checking everything. The letter was just so long and personal that I didn't even think about checking the recipient. It wasn't until a few minutes later when I heard my phone buzz with a message from Sarah that my stomach dropped. The text message simply read, "What's this?" I stared at it for a moment in complete disbelief. Did I just send my emotional confession letter to my ex? The letter, mind you, was full of these vulnerable, loving feelings about Emma, but it also had a few lines about Sarah, too, about how I'd once believed she was the one, how I'd struggled to let her go, and how meeting Emma had made me realize just how much I'd needed that change. Basically, it was a love letter to Emma, sprinkled with random reflections on my past relationship. I immediately opened my email to confirm, and of course there it was. I had sent the letter to Sarah instead of Emma. I felt like my soul left my body. I had no idea how to fix this. Do I try to explain it? Do I apologize for the weirdness? I panicked, staring at my screen, debating whether to just play it off as a mistake or face the consequences. But Sarah's next message made my decision for me. "I think you meant to send this to someone else? You really put a lot into this." I felt like the floor was going to swallow me whole. I didn't know how to respond. I sent back a simple sorry that was meant for someone else and immediately texted Emma, telling her about the whole ordeal. Emma was sweet about it, thankfully. She didn't judge me at all and told me not to worry, but I was still mortified. I couldn't even look at Sarah's messages anymore. To this day, I haven't heard from Sarah about it, and I haven't tried to bring it up with her. I'm pretty sure she's just confused, and I'd rather not deal with that conversation right now. Anyway, yeah, that's how I accidentally sent my emotional confession letter about my current partner to my ex. I still haven't fully recovered from the embarrassment. TIFU by accidentally setting my apartment on fire during a dinner party and getting kicked out of my own home. So, I thought I had everything under control. I had been planning this dinner party for weeks. A few friends, some wine, good food. What could go wrong, right? I'm usually not the one to host, but I figure I could make a nice impression, show everyone I can actually cook, and not just order takeout. To top it off, I had a new recipe I was dying to try: homemade lasagna. Now, I'm not saying I'm a terrible cook, but I don't exactly have a culinary degree either. Still, I thought, what's the worst that could happen? I spent the entire afternoon shopping, chopping, and preparing. I had made sure to prep everything, following all the recipes to the letter. I even watched a YouTube tutorial to make sure I didn't mess up the lasagna layering technique. By 6 p.m., everything was set. The guests were due to arrive at 7:30, so I had an hour and a half to pull everything together. The party started smoothly enough. My friends trickled in, and I offered them some wine while the lasagna baked in the oven. We all hung out in the living room, chatting about work, relationships, and life. My dog was running around being his usual hyperactive self, which meant there was a lot of laughter in the air. Everything felt perfect: the atmosphere, the food, the wine, until the clock ticked past 8 p.m. It was around then that I realized I hadn't checked on the lasagna in over an hour. It was supposed to be in the oven for 45 minutes, but my friends were so engrossed in the conversation that I lost track of time. I walked into the kitchen, and as I opened the oven, I was hit with the most horrible smell. The first thing that came to mind wasn't that the lasagna had burnt. No, it was that something in my oven had caught fire. I immediately panicked. The lasagna was blackened to a crisp, and there was a thin stream of smoke rising from the oven. I knew I had to act fast, but my brain was racing with thoughts of what now, and this can't be happening. I tried to grab the oven mitts, but my hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped them. Finally, I opened the oven door fully, and that's when it hit me. The lasagna was in fact on fire. I wasn't just dealing with a small burn. There were actual flames licking the edges of the baking dish. I grabbed the nearest thing to put the fire out, a tea towel, and rushed to smother the flames. But I had no idea what I was doing. I was so flustered that I accidentally hit the towel into the flames, making them flare up even higher. The fire was starting to spread. In that moment of panic, I remembered something my dad always told me: don't try to put out a grease fire with water. So of course, what do? I instinctively grab the nearest cup of water, which happened to be on the counter, and throw it directly onto the fire. Big mistake. The flames exploded, and I immediately realized I'd made everything worse. I was standing there in my kitchen, covered in water, with a raging fire in the oven. My friends heard the commotion and rushed in, but by then, the flames were so big that it was clear this wasn't something I could handle alone. One of my friends called 911, while the others tried to grab fire extinguishers. Now, let me tell you, I had never felt so out of control in my life. Here, I was a grown adult who had planned to host a beautiful dinner party, now standing in front of fire that was quickly spiraling out of control. The fire department showed up within minutes, but by that time, my kitchen looked like a scene from a disaster movie. They managed to get the fire out, but the damage was already done. My lasagna was reduced to a pile of ashes, my kitchen was wrecked, and the whole apartment smelled like a burnt offering. I was mortified. My friends, bless them, tried to comfort me, but I could tell they were just as shocked as I was. They weren't mad, but I could tell no one was going to be able to look at me the same way again. The firefighters told me that I was lucky to have caught the fire in time, but the damage was extensive enough that I'd probably need to get everything cleaned professionally. The fire alarm had gone off, and smoke had filled the apartment, which meant the building's ventilation system was shot. My neighbors probably thought there was a real fire raging, given how loud the alarms had been. The worst part came when the building management team arrived. The firemen were wrapping up their report when one of the building managers knocked on my door and asked to speak with me. I assumed they were just going to get an insurance report or something, but no. Instead, they said that the smoke damage and fire risk were significant enough that they had to evict me for safety reasons. Apparently, I didn't think my apartment was livable anymore, and since I was at fault, they decided it was best for me to leave immediately. Just like that, I was kicked out of my own apartment. There was no negotiation, no second chances. The lease was broken, and I had to leave that very night. They gave me a few hours to pack up some essentials, but everything in the apartment had to be dealt with by professionals. The fire had caused so much smoke and water damage that I was essentially living in a disaster zone. So yeah, my dinner party turned into a full-blown disaster. Not only did I ruin my own dinner, but I lost my apartment over it too. My friends, of course, tried to help and offered to let me crash at their places for a bit, but the damage to my pride was far worse than any material loss. I spent the next few weeks living out of suitcases while the insurance folks sorted through the mess. But that was nothing compared to the embarrassment of knowing my attempt at a classy dinner party had turned into an unintentional fireball of chaos. Moral of the story? Don't try to cook an elaborate meal when you're not ready for the responsibility. And for the love of God, don't throw water on a grease fire. And maybe, just maybe, don't invite your friends over until you're sure your oven knows how to behave. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with a romantic dinner, but everything went horribly wrong. So, this happened a few weeks ago. To set the scene, I, 27M, have been dating my girlfriend, Sarah, 25F, for about 6 months. Things were going pretty well, but I felt like I needed to do something special for her. She'd always talked about how nice it would be to have a romantic dinner at home instead of going to a restaurant. She wasn't a big fan of eating out. She found it kind of overrated, but she loved the idea of cozy nights in. I'm not a chef by any means. In fact, I could barely make a sandwich without screwing it up, but I wanted to impress her. I'd seen her talk about how much she loved cooking shows, and I figured I could pull off something simple and elegant. I thought, how hard could it be? I mean, how much can go wrong with making pasta, right? I had a whole plan in my head. I was going to make a nice 3-course meal, some creamy garlic shrimp pasta, a side salad, and for dessert, a molten lava cake. I'd even bought a bottle of red wine to complete the vibe. I spent all day thinking about it, watching a bunch of cooking videos to make sure I knew what I was doing. I was confident, if not a little nervous, but I figured I could handle it. I started my day by setting up the apartment. I made sure it was nice and cozy with candles, some soft music in the background, and a clean, tidy space. I even made sure I wore something a little nicer than usual, button-down shirt, clean jeans, the works. I wanted to show her that I cared and that I was trying to make an effort. Then, I began prepping for the dinner. I was feeling pretty good at first. I gathered all the ingredients, had everything set out. I felt like a professional chef in a Michelin-starred kitchen. The shrimp went in the pan with some garlic, butter, and seasoning. It smelled amazing, and I was feeling pretty proud of myself. I thought, I've got this in the bag. That was until I realized that I had no idea how to cook pasta. I'd never really paid attention when I made spaghetti before, so when I tossed the noodles into the pot, I had no idea how much water to add. I kept tossing in, thinking I could just eyeball it. Then I panicked and added more pasta. The pot was now overstuffed, and I realized there was no way everything was going to cook properly. In my rush to fix that, I decided to add a ton of salt to the water. But instead of fixing the problem, I made things worse. I had a huge mess of clumpy, sticky noodles stuck together. Now, at this point, I started to realize that maybe I wasn't as great a chef as I thought. But I still had hope. It wasn't too late, right? I just fix it and keep going. Next, I decided to work on the salad. Simple, right? Just some mixed greens, tomatoes, and a dressing. I tossed everything together, and the salad looked fine until I realized I didn't have any dressing. I remembered I'd bought some, but I couldn't find it anywhere. It was nowhere to be seen, and I was too far into the process to stop and run to the store. So, I tried to make my own dressing from scratch. The problem? I had no idea how to make dressing. What resulted was a concoction of olive oil, balsamic vinegar, and something that resembled mustard. It was the worst dressing I've ever tasted, but I kept quiet, hoping it wouldn't be too obvious. At this point, Sarah was due to arrive in about 30 minutes, so I started to panic. I needed to finish this. I started plating the pasta, but it was a mess. The sauce was lumpy because I didn't stir it properly. The shrimp was overcooked, and the pasta was more like a blob of goo stuck together. I tried to salvage it by mixing in more sauce and garnishing it with some parsley to make it look fancy, but it was beyond saving. But I figured, it's fine, she's not going to notice, right? Then, I realized the lava cakes had been sitting in the fridge for too long. They were supposed to go in the oven for a little while before dinner, but I'd lost track of time and forgot to preheat the oven. When I finally did, I put the cakes in, but I was so frazzled by then that I didn't even check the timer. The cakes baked for too long, and instead of molten lava, I ended up with slightly burned chocolate cakes that had no gooey center at all. Great. Dessert was ruined. I was absolutely freaking out at this point. The dinner was a disaster, but I couldn't just give up now. Sarah was going to be there any minute. I quickly cleaned up the kitchen and tried to put on a brave face. When she knocked on the door, I took a deep breath, opened it, and tried to act normal. She looked adorable, of course, and I gave her a hug and kiss, trying to pretend nothing was wrong. I led her to the dining table, which looked pretty nice despite my chaotic cooking. I sat down across from her, trying to maintain some level of composure. We started with the salad, and I could see the confusion in her eyes as she took a bite. It was the worst salad she'd ever had. The dressing was awful. She hesitated, trying to hide her reaction, but I could tell it wasn't going well. Then came the pasta. I took a bite, and it was not great. The noodles were soggy, the shrimp overcooked, and the sauce had a weird texture. Sarah tried to be polite about it, but she couldn't help herself. She coughed a little and then glanced at me with a raised eyebrow. "This is interesting," she said, clearly trying to be kind. I just chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, I tried a new recipe," I said, hoping she wouldn't push it. Finally, we moved on to dessert, which was, predictably, a complete failure. The cakes were dry and burnt, with no molten center. Sarah didn't even try to eat it. She just looked at it for a moment before looking up at me and saying, "I appreciate the effort, really, but maybe we should just order pizza next time?" I could feel my face turning red. The whole night had been an absolute train wreck, and I was just trying to hold back my embarrassment. We ended up laughing about it, and Sarah was super sweet about it all, but I could tell that I'd ruined the night. After dinner, I apologized profusely and promised her that the next time we did this, I'd let a professional handle the cooking. We ended up ordering pizza, like she suggested, and spent the rest of the night watching movies, which turned out to be way more fun than my disastrous dinner. Moral of the story: if you're not a cook, don't try to pull off a fancy dinner for someone who actually knows how food is supposed to taste. Stick to ordering takeout or going to a restaurant. Your partner will appreciate it more than you'll ever know. TIFU by inviting my ex to my wedding. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had spent months planning every detail, making sure everything was perfect. The dress, the flowers, the venue, the cake, it all had to be flawless. But in the middle of it all, I made a huge mistake that I'm still trying to come to terms with. I invited my ex to my wedding. Before I go any further, let me give you some context. My name is Sarah, and I met my now husband, Tom, 5 years ago. We had an instant connection, one of those love at first sight kind of deals. But before Tom came into the picture, I had a long-term relationship with someone else. Let's call him Mark. Mark and I had been together for almost 7 years, but like most relationships, it wasn't always easy. We had our fair share of ups and downs, but I always thought that we would eventually work things out. We lived together, shared the same circle of friends, and had even talked about getting married. However, after a particularly messy breakup, we went our separate ways. After the breakup, I didn't see Mark for almost 2 years. I threw myself into my work and started rebuilding my life. That's when I met Tom, and I quickly realized that I was falling for him. We moved in together after a year of dating, and soon after that, we started planning our wedding. But there was one thing I hadn't completely let go of: Mark. Not in a romantic sense, but I still considered him a friend. Mark had always been a part of my life, and despite everything that had happened between us, I felt a sense of loyalty to him. We had shared so much over the years, and I figured that since I had moved on and was now with Tom, I could still be friends with him. I didn't want to erase the good memories from our relationship. About a month before the wedding, Mark reached out to me. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. He sent me a text asking how I was doing and if we could catch up. I was a little nervous, but I agreed. We met up for coffee, and the conversation was surprisingly comfortable. We talked about life, our mutual friends, and all the things we had done together in the past. It was almost as if the years of tension had melted away. He apologized for the way things ended, and I told him I had forgiven him. It felt like we had finally closed that chapter. During our conversation, Mark mentioned that he had heard about my wedding. I told him all about the plans, the venue, and how excited I was. He said he was happy for me, but also admitted that he felt a little weird about it. I understood. After all, we had been together for so long. He asked if he could come, and without really thinking it through, I agreed. I thought, what's the harm? I'm over him, Tom's fine with it, and we're just friends now. So I invited Mark to the wedding. I didn't tell Tom. I thought it would be fine. After all, Tom and I had been together for years, and he knew that Mark was part of my past. I assumed it wouldn't be an issue. I should have known better. The day of the wedding came, and everything was going smoothly. The ceremony was beautiful, the guests were all in high spirits, and I was on cloud nine. I walked down the aisle with my dad, and I couldn't help but feel like the luckiest woman alive. Tom looked at me like I was the only person in the world. We said our vows, exchanged rings, and sealed it with a kiss. The reception was even better. We had great food, music, and dancing. Everyone was having a blast, and I was so happy to be surrounded by the people I loved. But then Mark showed up. He walked in just as the reception was getting into full swing, and it was like everything came to a halt. I wasn't sure if it was the sudden change in atmosphere or just the fact that I hadn't really processed how awkward it would be for him to be there, but I immediately felt uncomfortable. Tom was standing next to me when Mark walked in, and I could see the tension in his eyes as he looked at me. I could tell he wasn't happy, but he didn't say anything. He gave Mark a polite nod, and Mark did the same. It was awkward. My friends, who knew about the situation, seemed to be giving me side glances, but no one said anything out loud. I tried to act normal, but the evening had completely shifted. I kept bouncing back and forth between talking to Tom and then running into Mark. Every time I tried to enjoy myself, I would see them both across the room, exchanging polite smiles, but I could feel the underlying tension. I don't know what I expected, but it definitely wasn't this. I felt torn between two parts of my life that didn't mesh well together. Things only got worse during the speeches. Tom's best man made a funny and heartfelt toast, and then Mark stood up to give a speech as well. He wasn't officially a part of the wedding party, but I had somehow let him convince me that he had to speak. The last thing I wanted was for the evening to be hijacked by a speech from my ex, but I didn't know how to back out of it. Mark's speech was a strange mix of heartfelt memories and awkward references to our past relationship. He started with, "I've known Sarah for a long time, and I can say without a doubt, she's always been a great person." He then told the story of how we first met and how we used to go to the same coffee shop every Sunday. I wanted to crawl under the table. People were chuckling, but it wasn't the fun, light-hearted laughter you want at a wedding. It was more like, should we be laughing at this? I looked at Tom. He was smiling, but it was the tight, forced kind of smile that said everything without saying a word. I could tell he was holding back his frustration. I could see the veins in his neck slightly bulging, and his hand was clenched around his glass. My stomach dropped. I realized then that I had made a huge mistake. The rest of the evening was a blur. Tom didn't speak to Mark the rest of the night, and I could tell he was trying to keep his cool. I kept apologizing to Tom, but he just nodded and smiled through it. He said he didn't want to ruin the night, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. It wasn't until later that night, when we were alone, that Tom confronted me about it. He told me that he was incredibly upset and hurt that I had invited my ex without consulting him first. He said it felt disrespectful to him, and I couldn't argue with that. He had every right to feel that way. I tried to explain myself, but the damage had already been done. We had a long conversation, and I realized how thoughtless and inconsiderate I had been. I never should have invited Mark without talking to Tom about it first. I had hurt my husband on the one day that was supposed to be about celebrating our love and our future together. The next few weeks were difficult. Tom and I talked things through, but it took time for him to fully forgive me. We eventually got to a better place, but it wasn't without some emotional fallout. The wedding, which should have been a joyful occasion, had turned into a reminder of my mistake. I learned the hard way that sometimes, even with the best intentions, your actions can have unintended consequences. I thought I could handle it all, but I should have known that some things just don't belong in certain chapters of your life. So yeah, that's my TIFU. I invited my ex to my wedding, and it almost ruined my marriage. TIFU by taking the wrong exit on the way to my wedding, and it nearly ruined the entire thing. So, Let me start this off by saying that I'm not normally a person who gets nervous. I mean, I get anxious, sure, but I can usually keep my cool in high-pressure situations. However, that all changed on the day of my wedding. My fiancée, Emily, and I had been planning our wedding for over a year. We wanted something simple, yet beautiful. A small ceremony with close family and friends in a lovely countryside venue about 2 hours outside of the city. Everything was going smoothly. We had the perfect dress, the perfect suit, the perfect photographer, and the perfect playlist for the reception. The weather was even cooperating. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, the kind of day you dream about when you think of fairy tale wedding. I couldn't have been happier, except for one thing. I was running late. It wasn't a huge deal at first. I mean, weddings never run exactly on time, right? I figured I'd make it with a few minutes to spare. But then, as we were driving toward the venue, things started to go south. You see, we had hired a shuttle to take me and my groomsmen to the venue. It was a nice, spacious shuttle, and I was feeling pretty relaxed, just joking around with my friends as we got closer to the location. The driver, who was this older guy named Bob, seemed like he knew what he was doing. He'd driven the route to the venue several times before, and I trusted him to get us there. But about 45 minutes into the drive, things started getting weird. Bob, who had been talking and telling stories about his previous experiences driving for weddings, suddenly grew quiet. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just focusing on the road. But then, I noticed that we were not passing the usual landmarks I remembered from the rehearsal the day before. We were supposed to be nearing the exit for the venue in just a few minutes, but instead, we were passing signs for places I didn't recognize. "Hey, Bob, are you sure we're on the right road?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but feeling that familiar pang of anxiety creeping up. Bob didn't answer right away. He glanced in the rearview mirror and just gave a little shrug. Yeah, we're fine. Just follow the signs. It'll be a bit of a detour, but we'll be there soon." I don't know why, but I took his word for it. It didn't help that I was in a tuxedo and starting to sweat like crazy from the nerves and the heat, but I was also trying to stay calm for my friends and family. I mean, it was my wedding day. Surely nothing could go too wrong, right? Well, fast forward a few more minutes, and we're cruising down a highway that is definitely not the one I remember from our rehearsal. I'm starting to get a bad feeling in my stomach. I glance at the GPS on my phone, but I'm not connected to the shuttle's Wi-Fi, so it's just spinning in circles trying to get a signal. "Bob, can you pull over for a sec? I think we're on the wrong road," I said, more forcefully this time. Bob looked at me through the rearview mirror and let out a little chuckle. "Don't worry, kid. I've been doing this for years. I know what I'm doing. We're just taking a scenic route." At this point, I'm starting to get frustrated, but I still don't want to make a scene. I check the time on my phone, and we're dangerously close to when the ceremony is supposed to start. We're supposed to be there, getting in position, and I'm still in a shuttle somewhere in the middle of nowhere, heading in the completely wrong direction. The next exit pops up, and Bob takes it without even slowing down. I'm not sure if it's the panic setting in or the fact that the exit signs are no longer even familiar, but I've had enough. "Bob, stop the shuttle, please. I need to call my fiancée. This isn't right." Bob pulls over, and I quickly jump out of the shuttle and dial Emily's number. I'm already apologizing before she even answers. The last thing I want is for her to know I'm screwing up already. On our wedding day, no less. She picks up on the second ring. "Hey, babe. I'm so sorry, but something's not right. We're on the wrong road. I'm not sure where we are, but I'm trying to get back on track," I say, voice shaking. Emily is understandably upset, but tries to calm me down. She tells me to just follow the signs and that she'll delay the ceremony by a few minutes. That's when I realized something crucial. I had not paid attention to the actual directions. I had relied entirely on Bob to get me there, and now we were hopelessly lost. I hang up with her, take a deep breath, and look around. We're on a country road with no phone signal and barely any cars passing by. There's nothing around but farmland. It's like we've stepped into a parallel universe where weddings don't exist. I feel a wave of panic crash over me. I'm supposed to be there, walking down the aisle in front of everyone I care about, and instead, I'm standing on the side of a random road in the middle of nowhere. It's like my worst nightmare. But then, out of nowhere, a miracle happens. A car pulls up beside the shuttle, and it's a couple of my groomsmen who had been following in a separate car. They had seen the shuttle take the wrong exit and have been trying to catch up with us for the last 15 minutes. They told me they saw a sign for the venue about 5 miles back. I don't even know why I didn't think to call them earlier, but the panic made me forget about everything else. We piled back in the shuttle, and Bob seems to realize he's made a mistake. Finally, we turn around, and after what feels like an eternity, we're back on track. By the time we get to the venue, the ceremony has been delayed, but only by a few minutes. I'm sweating through my tuxedo, but I'm relieved to be there. As it turns out, Emily had been worried sick, but she was understanding. The ceremony went off without a hitch, well, almost, and we both laughed about the whole thing afterward. Now, whenever someone talks about getting lost on their wedding day, I just shake my head and think, I've been there. I've really been there, and will never let Bob live it down. TIFU by accidentally becoming the centerpiece of a family reunion, and now I'm known as the cousin with the chicken incident. So, this happened a few months ago, but the embarrassment still lingers. I can't seem to escape the reputation that has now been permanently attached to my name in my extended family. I have become the guy who almost caused a food poisoning disaster at a family reunion. I don't even know where to start, so I'll just dive in. I was really excited for the family reunion. I'm one of those people who genuinely enjoys spending time with my relatives. I don't have a ton of close friends, so my extended family is the closest thing to a social circle I've got. The gathering was happening in my aunt's house, a big, rustic place with a backyard that always serves as the perfect setting for a cookout. Everyone was going to bring something to contribute to the meal, and I was no exception. Now, I'll admit, I'm not much of a cook. My idea of preparing food usually involves microwaving something or ordering takeout, but my mom had insisted that I should at least try to contribute something more meaningful than the usual store-bought desserts I bring. After much internal debate, I decided I would make something simple but hearty: grilled chicken. It seemed like a safe choice. Everyone loves chicken, and how hard could it be to cook a few pieces on the grill? The problem is, I didn't actually know how to cook chicken properly. But at the time, I felt confident enough to pretend that I did. How hard could grilling be? You throw it on the grill, you flip it a few times, and it's done, right? Well, my first mistake was not doing enough research on how to grill chicken safely. You see, I didn't even check to make sure the chicken was cooked all the way through. I had a vague notion that it should look brown and not be pink in the middle, so I just went with that. When I arrived at my aunt's house, the grill was already fired up. My cousins were handling the burgers and hot dogs, so I felt a bit of pressure to get my chicken just right. I laid the pieces of chicken on the grill, trying to look confident as I hovered over it like a master chef. I've been watching some cooking shows lately, and I was ready to put my newfound knowledge to work. As the chicken sizzled away, my aunt and uncle were talking about their latest trip to the mountains, and a couple of my cousins were catching up on school gossip. I was so absorbed in this family banter that I completely forgot to check on the chicken for several minutes. But of course, I thought nothing of it. It was fine, right? At some point, my cousin Emma, who's a vegetarian, came outside to ask if I needed help with anything. She peered at the grill for a second and casually asked, "Are you sure that chicken's cooked all the way through?" I scoffed at her concern. "Yeah, it's totally fine. It's chicken, not steak. It's supposed to be juicy, right?" She gave me a skeptical look, but didn't press the issue, so I shrugged it off. The last thing I wanted was to feel like a failure in front of my relatives, so I turned my attention back to the grill. After what I thought was a sufficient amount of time, I decided to take the chicken off the grill. I was starting to feel pretty proud of myself. The outside had a nice char, and it looked golden brown. I cut into a piece, saw no pink, and decided that was good enough. At this point, I felt like I was truly killing it as the family's newest barbecue expert. We all sat down to eat, and the atmosphere was as festive as usual. Everyone was talking about their recent vacations, the latest family gossip, and all the usual banter you'd expect at a reunion. I'm sitting there enjoying my grilled chicken when my cousin Mark, who's always been a little outspoken, lets out a loud cough. He takes a swig of his drink, then looks around the table and says, "Guys, I think this chicken's a little undercooked." The room falls silent. I stare at Mark, not understanding what he's talking about. I'm pretty sure I cooked it enough. He points at the chicken in front of him. It's pink in the middle. I'm not sure what happened next, but I felt my stomach drop. The reality of the situation started to dawn on me. I'd screwed up. My mind raced, and I could feel my face going red. I asked him to show me where it was pink, and sure enough, the piece he was holding up was still raw in the center. At this point, the entire table was looking at me, waiting for an explanation. I tried to laugh it off. Haha, I guess I didn't cook it long enough, huh? But no one was laughing. My aunt immediately got up and started grabbing people's plates. "No one eat the chicken," she yelled. And then she went on to explain to everyone why eating undercooked poultry was such a bad idea. She mentioned salmonella, food poisoning, and the fact that I was about to become the family's greatest liability. As if that wasn't bad enough, it turns out that one of my cousins, Sarah, had taken a bite of the chicken just before Mark had pointed it out. She immediately felt queasy and started saying her stomach hurt. That was when I realized that I had caused a legitimate problem. My mind was spinning. How could I have been so dumb? How did I not realize that the chicken might still be raw? People started panicking a little. My aunt called my mom, who, unsurprisingly, wasn't thrilled to hear what had happened. The whole family now seemed to be looking at me as the person who almost poisoned everyone. The rest of the day was awkward. People took turns checking Sarah's condition. Thankfully, she was fine after a while, but no one wanted to touch the remaining chicken. It sat there, uneaten and cold, a symbol of my failure. I tried to salvage the situation by saying I would help clean up, but my cousins kept making passive-aggressive remarks. "Guess we won't be having your chicken next year." Huh, one of them said with a wink. Another cousin made a joke about me being the chicken disaster. From that moment on, I became known as the guy who couldn't cook chicken properly at family gatherings. To make matters worse, I'm now the person everyone talks about when food safety is mentioned. If someone brings up food poisoning, someone else will always say, "Remember when John almost gave us all salmonella with his chicken?" And it's like a joke that never stops. I tried to redeem myself at the next family reunion by offering to bring dessert, but no one let me live it down. My aunt even gave me a Chicken of the Year trophy, made of plastic, of course. It's now sitting on a shelf in my parents' house as a constant reminder of my humiliation. So, yeah, I really messed up. If you're ever cooking chicken for a big group, don't just wing it, pun intended. Make sure it's fully cooked, and don't let your pride get in the way of a quick Google search. Otherwise, you might end up with a new nickname that you'll never shake. Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what could be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by accidentally starting a fire during a job interview. So this happened last week, and it's been on my mind ever since. I'm still not sure if I should laugh or cry, but I'm definitely not going back to that company for a second round. To give you some background, I've been looking for a job for months. I'm a software developer, and while I've had some freelance gigs here and there, I was hoping to land something more stable. When I saw a job opening for a junior developer position at a small tech company that had just recently expanded, I was excited. They seemed cool, innovative, with a pretty solid reputation in the industry. I applied right away, and a week later, I got an email asking me to come in for an interview. I was stoked, obviously. This could be it. The day of the interview arrived, and I tried my best to stay calm. I had researched the company, studied the job description thoroughly, and even brushed up on a few technical skills that I thought might come up. I threw on a nice shirt and some jeans that weren't too casual. I know, no suit for tech interviews, but I still wanted to look presentable. When I arrived, the building was modern, sleek, and a little intimidating, like one of those spaces you see in Silicon Valley documentaries. The receptionist was friendly and gave me a visitor pass. I followed the directions to the meeting room, which was on the 3rd floor, and when I knocked on the door, a guy who seemed to be in his early 30s welcomed me in with a huge smile. He introduced himself as Mark, the lead developer. The interview started off well enough. He asked me a few basic questions about my experience, why I was interested in the company, and my thoughts on a few recent programming trends. Then, about 15 minutes into the conversation, he got up from his desk and said, "Hey, let's head to the break room. How about a little demo I'd like to show you? It'll help you understand the type of work we do here." I followed him down the hallway to a small kitchen area where there was a coffee machine, some snacks, and an entire wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a pretty stunning view of the city. Mark gestured for me to take a seat at a table in the center of the room. On the table, there was a small, fancy-looking portable projector. I had no idea what this demo was going to be, but I was intrigued. "All right, so this is a fun little thing we've been working on," he said, setting up the projector. "It's kind of a mix between a team-building exercise and some interactive training for our new hires. I think you'll get a kick out of it." He pressed a button, and the projector clicked on, casting a glowing image on the wall. It looked like a small fire extinguisher icon with some text underneath that read, "How to properly respond to a fire emergency." I blinked in confusion. Was this really a training module about fire safety? That seemed a little weird for an interview, but I went along with it. "You ready?" Mark asked with a grin. Sure," I replied, a little hesitant. He hit another button, and suddenly, the room was filled with sound effects, blaring alarms, crackling fire, and a slightly panicked voice saying, "Warning, fire detected in the building. Please evacuate immediately." I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. The demo was completely unexpected, and the only thing I could think of was that maybe this was some kind of unconventional test, something designed to see how I reacted under pressure. Mark was still grinning like a maniac, and I realized that he wasn't going to stop until I engaged with whatever weird training exercise he had put together. "Okay," he said. "Now it's your turn. What's the first thing you should do if you encounter a fire while working here?" I thought for a moment, tried to recall the fire safety training I'd gotten in college, which was admittedly very basic and mostly involved the phrase stop, drop, and roll, which wasn't going to help me here. "I guess I should leave the building," I offered, uncertain. Mark nodded enthusiastically, as if this was the correct answer. He hit another button, and the alarms on the screen grew louder. The lights flickered in the room. It was starting to feel a little more like a horror movie than an interview. At this point, I was fully committed to going along with whatever weird game this was. Mark hit another button, and suddenly, the projection screen began to simulate smoke, slowly at first, but it quickly became more intense. It was then that I started to notice the smell. It was faint at first, like something was burning, but as the smoke thickened, I realized the smell was getting stronger. Mark was still laughing, clearly enjoying my discomfort. But when the smoke became so thick that it actually started to sting my eyes, I got nervous. Mark?" I said, my voice a little shaky now. "I think this might be a little too realistic. Are you sure this is part of the demo?" He turned around, frowning for the first time since the interview started. He stood up and walked toward the smoke screen, but as soon as he got closer, he froze. That's when I saw it. The portable projector was sitting on a small, portable heater unit on the table. Somehow, the heat had caused the cables to short-circuit, which had in turn triggered a small fire near the back of the machine. I immediately felt a rush of panic. It was a fire, in an office, in the middle of my job interview. I jumped up and scrambled toward the fire extinguisher hanging on the wall, but Mark beat me to it. He grabbed it and aimed it at the fire, but by then, it had spread to the small rug beneath the heater. The entire thing went up in flames in an instant. "Shit," Mark cursed, spraying the extinguisher with a frenzy. He finally got the fire under control, but the room smelled like burnt plastic and charred fabric. The smoke alarm went off, and an emergency lighting system activated. I stood there, frozen. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The fire was out, but the damage had been done. Mark turned to me, looking completely embarrassed now. "Okay, well, this is not how I envisioned this going," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess we're going to have to pause the interview for a minute." The rest of the interview was a blur. We spent about 20 minutes in awkward silence, waiting for the fire department to show up, making small talk about how the building was fully equipped with fire safety systems. Clearly, that wasn't true. In the end, they didn't even ask me any more technical questions. They just apologized profusely and said that the fire extinguisher demo was a work in progress. Needless to say, I didn't get the job. I haven't heard from them since. So yeah, TIFU by nearly setting a building on fire during a job interview. Guess I'll be sticking to Zoom interviews from now on. TIFU by trying to impress my date and accidentally setting my kitchen on fire. So, this all started a few weeks ago. I, 26M, had been talking to this girl, Emma, 24F, for a few months. We met on a dating app, and after a few days of texting and chatting on the phone, we decided to meet in person. Our first date was pretty standard, dinner at a local Italian restaurant, a nice walk through the park afterward, nothing too special. but it went really well. We got along like we'd known each other forever, so we made plans for a second date. Now, I'm not the best cook. I can microwave a frozen dinner like a pro, but I'm by no means a culinary expert. But for this second date, I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to show Emma that I wasn't just some regular guy who took her to restaurants all the time. I wanted to impress her. So, I had this idea. I'd cook dinner for her at my place. You know, like one of those romantic nights where I make her dinner, maybe light some candles, and we sip wine while chatting and laughing. It seemed like a good plan, and I convinced myself it would work out perfectly. I spent days planning the meal. I wasn't about to go overboard, but I didn't want to just throw a pizza in the oven either. I decided to make a homemade lasagna from scratch. It wasn't too complicated, but it still showed effort, and I figured that would be impressive. I bought all the ingredients, researched a recipe online, and even watched a few cooking videos to make sure I was doing everything correctly. The night of the date arrived, and I was feeling pretty confident. I had all the ingredients laid out, the kitchen was clean, and I had set the mood with a few candles around the apartment. Emma was on her way, so I figured I had just enough time to finish cooking and get everything ready. I popped open a bottle of red wine to calm my nerves. I was way more nervous than I cared to admit, and then I got started on the lasagna. Everything was going smoothly at first. I boiled the noodles, cooked the ground beef, mixed the ricotta, and everything seemed to be falling into place. I put the first layer in the baking dish and was about to put it in the oven when I realized I had forgotten to preheat it. No big deal, I thought. I quickly set the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit and figured I'd just wait for it to heat up while I finished assembling the layers. Well, in the meantime, I got distracted. Emma had texted to let me know she was almost there, and I suddenly became hyper-aware of how much time I had left. I started rushing through the process. I didn't want her to walk in and find me frantically trying to put together a half-finished meal, so I started adding the top layers of cheese a little faster than I probably should have. I slapped everything together and finally slid the lasagna into the oven. By this point, I was already sweating from the heat of the kitchen and the pressure of getting everything perfect. Emma texted me again, saying she was downstairs, and I told her I'd be right there to let her in. I quickly ran to the door, opened it, and greeted her with a big smile and a glass of wine. She looked gorgeous, and I felt even more nervous. We exchanged a few pleasantries before I invited her into the apartment, where the smells of garlic, cheese, and tomato sauce filled the air. It was a little late to be doing this, but I still thought the lasagna would need a few more minutes in the oven, so I figured we could chat while it finished. Everything was going fine at first. We sat on the couch, talked about our days, and sipped wine. I thought I was being charming, and Emma seemed to be enjoying herself. But then I started to notice the smell. It wasn't the delicious, comforting scent of baking lasagna. No, this smelled like something was burning. I quickly jumped up and ran into the kitchen, where I was hit with an overwhelming cloud of smoke. I don't know what happened. I had set the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, but for some reason, the heat was off the charts. The lasagna was bubbling over in the oven, and the cheese on top had started to turn black. The kitchen was thick with smoke, and I could see the flames licking at the edges of the dish. Panic instantly set in. I'm not exactly a firefighter type of person, but I knew enough to know I shouldn't open the oven when there was smoke. I grabbed the oven mitts and pulled the lasagna out, only to be greeted by an inferno of bubbling cheese and sauce. I panicked even more, realizing the oven mitts were starting to smell like they were burning too. I tossed the lasagna onto the counter. It's still on fire, mind you, grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink and pulled the pin. I started spraying, but the foam came out all over the counter, the floor, and, well, me. Meanwhile, Emma, who had been in the living room and must have heard the chaos, rushed into the kitchen. She stood there frozen for a moment, taking in the scene. Me, covered in fire extinguisher foam, standing next to a flaming lasagna that was now half black and half mushy. "Is everything okay?" she asked, clearly concerned. I, covered in foam and standing next to a literal fire disaster, tried to keep my cool. Yeah, totally fine. Just a minor kitchen fire. I mean, nothing to worry about. The lasagna's extra crispy. She looked at me, wide-eyed, clearly unsure of how to respond. After a long, awkward pause, she finally said, "Well, I guess dinner's ruined." Huh? I laughed nervously, trying to salvage what was left of my dignity. Yeah, seems like it. But, hey, at least you won't have to eat it. We ended up ordering takeout from a nearby Thai place and ate in my living room. It wasn't exactly the romantic evening I had imagined, but we laughed about it. Emma was actually super cool about the whole thing, and she assured me that it wasn't a big deal. In the end, we had a great time anyway. But, yeah, I definitely learned a lesson that night. Cooking to impress someone might be a great idea in theory, but maybe next time I'll just stick to ordering delivery. TIFU by inviting my ex to my wedding and then realizing I still wasn't over her. A little over a year ago, I got married to the love of my life, Sarah. We've been together for 5 years and have been through thick and thin. We met in college, both studying in completely different fields, but somehow we managed to connect in a way that felt perfect from the very beginning. I was the quiet, introverted guy, and she was the energetic and outgoing one. We complemented each other well. When I proposed to her, it felt like I was asking for the most natural thing in the world. Now, this story isn't about Sarah. It's about an unfortunate mistake I made, one that I had to live with for a long time, and one that still affects me. You see, I had an ex. We'll call her Claire. We had been together for about 2 years before we broke up. It wasn't a bad breakup. There wasn't any cheating or betrayal, but we just weren't right for each other anymore. We still stayed friends, or at least we tried to. We would text occasionally, checking on each other, and every so often, we'd catch up for a drink or dinner. It was one of those things where the lines between ex and friend get blurred, but it never really felt awkward, or at least I didn't think it did. In fact, it wasn't until after Sarah and I started dating that I realized how much of my past relationship with Claire still hung around. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would you invite an ex to your wedding? But here's the thing. I had been friends with Claire for years, and I was under the mistaken impression that our past was just that, past. It had been almost 2 years since Sarah and I got together, and in my mind, inviting Claire was no big deal. I figured if I could invite old friends and people from my past, I should extend the same courtesy to Claire, especially since we had kept things amicable. I'll admit, I didn't exactly tell Sarah about the invite until after I'd already sent it. Looking back, I can't really explain why I didn't bring it up earlier. I guess I was so used to Claire being in my life that I didn't think about how it might make Sarah feel. So, about a month before the wedding, I sent Claire an invitation. I didn't think it would be an issue. She was, after all, just a friend, right? I'll also admit that I didn't realize how badly I had underestimated how difficult it would be for me to see Claire again. We had been through a lot together. It was a relationship that meant a lot to me, and as much as I thought I had moved on, I never really did. I told myself I was over her. I convinced myself that I was completely in love with Sarah and that nothing could ever shake that. But the thing is, sometimes when you open old wounds, they don't just heal, they bleed all over again. The day of the wedding finally arrived. The venue was beautiful, the guests were all smiles, and everything felt like a fairy tale. Sarah looked absolutely stunning in her wedding dress, and I couldn't wait to marry her. The ceremony was perfect. No hiccups, no disasters. I thought to myself, I've got this. This is it. I'm marrying the woman I love. But then, the reception started. As I was greeting the guests and making my rounds, I saw Claire standing by the bar. She looked just as beautiful as she had all those years ago, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I was suddenly overwhelmed with memories. The good, the bad, the in-between. The years we spent together, the trips we took, the late-night talks, and all the little moments that I had somehow let slip into the past. I thought I was over all of that, but as I made my way over to her, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't. Claire stood up as I approached, giving me that same warm smile she always had. We exchanged pleasantries, nothing extraordinary, but then the awkwardness hit. She asked how I was doing, how Sarah was, and if I was ready for this big new chapter in my life. The whole conversation felt surreal. It was like I was talking to a ghost of a life I used to know. But then, something unexpected happened. As I glanced across the room, I saw Sarah talking to some of my cousins. She was laughing, her head tilted back as she caught up with them. And, for a brief moment, she looked like the happiest woman in the world. It was at that exact moment that I realized how much I still cared about Claire. Not in the way I used to, but in a way that was impossible to ignore. I felt my heart tug in a way I hadn't felt in years. The fact that I was standing there with my ex, while my soon-to-be wife was laughing with family, felt wrong. I felt like I was betraying her, even if I hadn't done anything wrong. I quickly excused myself from Claire and walked across the room to Sarah, trying my best to act normal. I kissed her on the cheek and told her how beautiful she looked. She smiled, and for a moment, everything felt right. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about Claire. The conversations felt forced, the smiles felt fake, and every time I looked at Sarah, I felt guilty. I kept telling myself that I was just tired, just overwhelmed by the emotions of the day, but the truth was I wasn't ready for the flood of feelings Claire had stirred up in me. After the wedding, Sarah and I went on our honeymoon, and I tried to focus on her and our new life together. But the thoughts of Claire kept creeping into my mind. The way she looked that night, the way she laughed, the way she used to make me feel. I didn't understand what was happening. I should have been fully focused on my wife, the woman I loved. But there was this nagging feeling that I had unresolved emotions, feelings I hadn't dealt with properly. I couldn't keep ignoring it, so about a week after we got back, I had a long conversation with Sarah. I told her everything about inviting Claire, about how it made me feel, about the guilt I was carrying. I was terrified, but I had to be honest. I needed to explain why I felt so strange about the whole thing. To her credit, Sarah took it surprisingly well. She didn't freak out or accuse me of anything. She told me that she trusted me and that it was okay to have unresolved feelings, but that I needed to work through them. We agreed that I would talk to Claire and set boundaries. And that's exactly what I did. I reached out to Claire, apologized for the awkwardness, and told her that I needed to stop trying to maintain a friendship with her. It was too confusing for me, and I had to move on completely in order to be the best husband I could be to Sarah. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And while things between me and Claire are a little tense now, I think it was the right decision. My marriage to Sarah is the most important thing in my life, and I learned the hard way that sometimes you have to cut ties with the past to fully embrace the future. So yeah, I fucked up. I invited my ex to my wedding, thinking I could keep everything perfectly balanced, but instead, I opened a door to feelings I wasn't ready to confront. The good news is that Sarah and I are doing great now, and I've learned to keep the past where it belongs, in the past. TIFU by trying to impress my date and ended up in a full-blown hospital visit. So, I'm going to be straight up. This was one of the worst, most embarrassing things to happen to me in a long time, and I'm still not sure whether I'm more embarrassed about what happened or the fact that I'm sharing this on the internet. But here goes. A couple of weeks ago, I, 28M, met this amazing woman, 26F, on a dating app. Her profile was full of travel photos, pictures of her cooking, and her general vibe was exactly what I was looking for: intelligent, adventurous, and funny. We exchanged messages for a while before deciding to meet up for dinner. I was super excited, but also a little nervous, as you do when you really like someone. I spent way too much time picking out the right outfit and making sure my hair looked perfect. Don't judge me. I know I'm not alone here. We met at this cute little bistro downtown. It was intimate and had a cool atmosphere, great for a first date. We had a good conversation over appetizers and drinks. She was easy to talk to, and I felt like things were going really well. The chemistry was undeniable. After a while, we were laughing and talking about anything and everything. It was a perfect date, and I felt like I was totally in the zone. Then, the moment came when I decided I was going to impress her. You know, that moment when you feel like you've been charming enough, and now you want to throw in something that'll knock her socks off. I've always been into fitness and martial arts, particularly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been training for a few years, and I've gotten pretty decent at it. I thought, hey, I can totally show off a little. She'll be impressed by my skills, and this will make me look like the coolest guy ever. So, I casually mentioned that I've been practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that I could probably show her a cool move or two if she wanted. Her eyes lit up, and she said, "Wait, you do Jiu-Jitsu? That's awesome. You have to show me something." My heart raced with excitement. This was my moment. We were sitting near an open area, so I figured this would be the perfect time to demonstrate a quick takedown or maybe a simple submission hold. But as I got up to stand, I realized something. We were in a small, crowded restaurant with people all around us. I also realized I had no real space to demonstrate anything without causing a scene. But by this point, my ego was already on fire. There was no turning back. I asked the waiter for a little space and pointed to a nearby corner, thinking it would be enough for a quick demonstration. The waiter gave me an odd look, but seemed to just roll with it. By now, my date was looking at me with wide eyes, clearly excited to see what I was going to do. What I didn't realize was that I had massively underestimated how little space we had to work with. The corner I had chosen was way too small, and the tables around us were so close together that we were basically boxed in by the walls and chairs. But I was already hyped up, and there was no turning back. I asked her to stand up, and I tried to demonstrate a basic move, a single leg takedown. It's pretty straightforward in jiu-jitsu, where you grab one of your opponent's legs, lift it, and take them down to the ground. The move is usually performed in a controlled environment, like a gym with mats and plenty of space. But instead of a gym with mats, I had a packed restaurant with ceramic tile floors, chairs, tables, and waiters zipping by with hot plates of food. I went for it, grabbed her leg, and tried to execute the move. The problem? The small space. As soon as I tried to lift her leg, I ended up tripping over the chair next to us. In a split second, I lost my balance and flung both of us toward the table. I thought we were going to go down in a graceful tumble, but instead, I smacked her into the edge of the table, and both of us crashed to the ground with a horrible thud. But wait, it gets worse. In the process of falling, I managed to kick the chair next to us right into the waiter, who was carrying a hot plate of food. The plate flew out of his hands, and in the most perfect comedic disaster ever, the food went flying through the air and landed directly on top of the couple sitting at the table next to us. It was an absolute nightmare. The restaurant went completely silent. The waiter was standing there frozen, mouth agape. The couple next to us was covered in food, looking horrified, and I was just lying on the floor, tangled up in my date in a mess of chairs. It felt like time slowed down. The whole scene was like something out of slapstick comedy, only it wasn't funny. At least not at the time. My date, who was still partially tangled in my arms, was looking up at me with this wide-eyed, confused expression. She was completely silent. I was mortified. I didn't know what to say. The restaurant manager came rushing over, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. The couple who got hit with the food was angrily asking for the manager's help. The waiter was frantically trying to clean up the mess, but it was clear everything had gone horribly wrong. I helped my date up, apologizing profusely, and told the manager that I'd be happy to cover the cost of the meal for the couple we'd ruined. They didn't seem to want anything from me, though, aside from a quick exit from the scene. My date was clearly not impressed anymore. She didn't even make eye contact with me as we awkwardly made our way to the door. It wasn't until we got outside that she finally said, "I'm really sorry, but I just don't think we're a match." And with that, she got into a cab and drove away. I was left standing there, completely humiliated, with a phone that buzzed with texts from friends who'd heard about the disaster. Apparently, the whole restaurant had shared the story, and my disastrous attempt at jiu-jitsu had become the highlight of the night for everyone in the place. To make matters worse, when I got home, I realized that I had badly twisted my ankle in the process. It hurt like hell, and I had to limp to the couch and watch reruns of some mindless TV show to forget what had just happened. Spoiler alert, I didn't forget. TLDR, tried to impress my date with a Brazilian jiu-jitsu move in a packed restaurant, ended up knocking both of us over, sending food flying into another couple, getting kicked out of the restaurant, and losing the date. Also sprained my ankle. TIFU by accidentally insulting my boss in front of the entire company during our annual meeting. So, this happened last week at work, and I'm still trying to process everything. I worked at the same company for almost 3 years, and things have been going well. I'm in a middle management position, and my team is great. My boss, let's call him Greg, is a solid guy. He's approachable, generally friendly, and I've never had any serious issues with him. Well, that was until the annual meeting, which turned into a disaster that I'm not sure I'll ever live down. For some context, every year the company holds a massive meeting at the end of Q1 to review our progress, set new goals for the upcoming year, and, of course, hand out awards to employees who've really gone above and beyond. It's usually a pretty exciting event, especially if you're getting recognized, and it's a big deal in the office. It's also a huge networking opportunity with the higher-ups in the company, and I knew I'd be interacting with some important people that day. The meeting was held in a big conference room with dozens of employees present, ranging from entry-level staff to high-level execs. It was a long event, full of presentations, PowerPoints, and a lot of talking. People were getting antsy by the time we reached the team achievements segment of the meeting. Greg, my boss, was called up to the front to talk about our department's progress over the last year. Now, Greg is known for being a bit of a dad joke guy. He loves telling these cheesy one-liners, and honestly, it's kind of endearing. However, I didn't expect him to kick off his speech with one of his usual corny jokes. The room was mostly silent, so when Greg asked, "Do you know why the computer was cold?" and paused, everyone sort of looked at each other. I assumed it was the setup for a punchline, so I did what anyone would do. I leaned over to the person sitting next to me and whispered, because it left its windows open. I thought I was being clever. I thought I was just quietly participating in the joke, contributing to the atmosphere. The person next to me chuckled a little, but then the room went completely silent. Greg, who had just finished his setup, looked at me, clearly confused. He then looked at the audience and gave this forced half-laugh, as if trying to cover up a moment of discomfort. I froze, realizing that maybe I'd said it a bit too loud. But the worst part? It wasn't the volume of my comment or even the awkwardness that followed. It was what came next. Greg stared at me for what felt like an eternity. He looked at the crowd, and then back at me, and finally said, "No, that's not the punchline. The punchline is because it was on a bite diet." I instantly realized what had happened. My offhand comment about windows being open wasn't what he had planned at all. My joke had ruined his moment, and to make matters worse, Greg doubled down on it by awkwardly referencing my comment during his entire speech. You know, like our IT team, they always have these weird little jokes, but it's like they always try to make things sound smarter than they are. It's really funny. Gotta love them, though, even if they have their own way of communicating. My face turned beet red. I was dying inside. I had no idea how to recover from this. Everyone in the room was now looking at me, and Greg, clearly trying to recover from the awkwardness, kept awkwardly laughing and nodding at me, almost as if he was trying to defuse the tension. To make things worse, the rest of the meeting went in a completely different direction. Greg's speech continued, but it was hard to focus on anything after what had just happened. I kept mentally replaying the moment over and over, imagining how I must have looked. Here I was, a middle manager, in front of all these people, and I had somehow managed to derail my boss's entire speech in the dumbest possible way. The meeting finally came to an end, and as we were all walking out of the room, Greg pulled me aside. I thought he was going to say something like, "Hey, no big deal," or "It happens." Instead, he gave me this look like he was about to scold me, which immediately made me feel small. "Hey, my name, I'm not sure what that was about, but you need to be more careful next time. I know you were just trying to joke around, but that's not how we handle things in front of the company," Greg said, his tone a bit more serious than I was used to. I tried to apologize, stumbling over my words. I didn't mean to interrupt, Greg. I thought it was just a joke. I didn't know I'd mess up your moment." He just waved it off and said, "Look, I get it. Just next time, be a little more mindful of the situation. It's not just about you. We're all trying to make a good impression here." That stung more than I'd like to admit. I felt like I had just sabotaged not only my own credibility, but also Greg's. The whole rest of the day, I couldn't shake the embarrassment. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to figure out if there was any way I could have handled it differently. To make matters even worse, a couple of my colleagues pulled me aside later that day to joke about it. One of them, who I considered a good friend, said, "So, I guess Greg's joke is going to be the talk of the office for the next month, huh?" It was clear that people were noticing what had happened. That moment had somehow turned into office lore, and I was the one who'd made it awkward. It's been a week now, and honestly, I'm still cringing whenever I think about it. I made sure to apologize to Greg more than once, and he says it's all fine now, but I'm still not sure if I'll ever be able to live it down. I mean, how do you recover from something like this? How do you come back from accidentally insulting your boss in front of everyone? Anyway, I'm hoping that this is one of those stories that people forget about quickly, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be hearing about it for a long time. So yeah, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you think a joke will make things better, maybe keep it to yourself. It might not always work out the way you expect. TIFU by accidentally causing a full-on meltdown at a wedding. So, here's the thing. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I would be the cause of an emotional breakdown at a wedding, but I guess life has a way of surprising you. This all started a few months ago when my best friend, Sarah, asked me to be a bridesmaid at her wedding. I was beyond honored. We've been best friends since middle school, and I've been in her corner for all of life's big moments. So, of course, I said yes immediately. The wedding was going to be in a picturesque barn in the middle of nowhere, about 2 hours from where we lived. Honestly, the whole thing was beautiful. The venue, the decorations, the vibes, it was just magical. The one thing I didn't anticipate was that I would somehow manage to screw up one of the most important days of my best friend's life. The day of the wedding came around, and I was super excited, though a little nervous about the whole bridesmaid thing. It wasn't like I had never been to a wedding before, but being a part of the wedding party added a lot more responsibility. I had my dress, my shoes, and I had even gone the extra mile to have my hair and makeup professionally done. Everything was going smoothly until I got to the venue. At the barn, I met up with the rest of the bridal party, and we all started helping with last-minute touches. Sarah was running around like a headless chicken, trying to make sure everything was perfect. I could tell she was stressed, but still super happy. The day was finally here, and everything had been leading up to this moment. It wasn't until the ceremony was about to begin that things started to go sideways for me. We had a few minutes to kill before Sarah walked down the aisle, so I was casually chatting with the other bridesmaids in the back. I had a glass of champagne in hand, trying to calm my nerves, when I realized I hadn't checked my phone in a while. So I pulled it out of my bag, and that's when I noticed I had a message from my mom. It was a simple message that read, "Call me ASAP. It's urgent." Now, here's where my first mistake was. I didn't immediately call her. I assumed it was probably nothing important, maybe something about the family, or an update on my little brother's soccer game, something along those lines. But being a bit tipsy and distracted by the moment, I decided to respond with a quick text. "Can it wait? I'm at a wedding right now." I thought that would be the end of it, but she responded almost instantly. "No, it's really important. Call me now." I knew something was off, but at the same time, I didn't want to leave the bridal party or make a big deal out of it. I was the maid of honor, after all, and I had a responsibility to be there for Sarah, so I told myself I'll call her later and stuffed the phone back into my bag. Fast forward to the start of the ceremony. Sarah looked absolutely stunning. She walked down the aisle, and I could see her eyes brimming with happy tears. It was such a magical moment, and everything was perfect. That's when I noticed something even more odd. My phone started buzzing again, this time vibrating nonstop in my bag. I glanced around the room, then back at Sarah. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I still decided to ignore it for now. During the vows, as Sarah and her now husband exchanged promises, I swear I could feel my phone vibrating harder and harder, and my anxiety was starting to build. It felt like an eternity until the vows were done, and the couple was officially married. But the moment Sarah turned to me, smiling through her tears, I thought she was going to give me a hug. Instead, she leaned in and whispered, "Are you okay? You look really pale." I nodded, but at that point I realized I wasn't okay at all. Something was wrong with my mom, and I had been avoiding it. As Sarah and her husband went to sign the marriage certificate, I quickly stepped outside to call my mom. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't the rush of panic that hit me as soon as I heard her voice. "Mom," I asked. "Where the hell are you?" she demanded. "You need to come home right now." "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, now feeling completely on edge. "Just get your ass home. I don't have time to explain," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "You need to get here now. Your dad is in the hospital, and it's serious." My heart dropped. I had no idea what had happened, but my dad had a history of health problems, and hearing those words made my stomach flip. I didn't even think. I just hung up and ran back inside the barn to grab my things. At this point, the reception was about to start, and people were mingling. As I bolted toward the back, Sarah saw me. I could see the confusion on her face. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice concerned, but still trying to be calm in the chaotic moment. My dad's in the hospital, I said, barely able to get the words out. I have to leave. Wait, what? I don't understand. You can't leave now. It's my wedding day, Sarah said, clearly in distress. She didn't know the full details, but I could see her face crumpling with emotion. I'm sorry, Sarah. I really need to go. It's an emergency, I said, try to move past her. And no, she screamed, causing a few heads to turn. This is my wedding. I can't believe you're doing this right now. I'm about to have a meltdown and you're walking out like this? I was completely taken aback. I didn't want to be a burden, but at that moment, it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. The bride was having a meltdown. The room was silent except for her voice, and I felt like everyone was staring at me. I'm sorry, I yelled back, feeling completely panicked, but I wasn't sure how to fix this. I turned to leave, but she chased after me. You cannot leave me today, of all days, she cried. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't just stay at her wedding while my dad was in the hospital. I apologized over and over as I ran out of the bar, my mind racing. I ended up driving to the hospital in complete shock. By the time I arrived, I found out that my dad was okay, thankfully, but he had been in a car accident. I ended up staying at the hospital all night, but when I eventually checked my phone, I was hit with a wave of messages from Sarah. She was furious. She felt abandoned, and understandably so. I tried to explain the situation, but she didn't want to hear it. I had missed the most important day of her life, and she was heartbroken. It's been a week since that moment, and things are still pretty awkward between us. I know it was an emergency, but I'll forever regret the timing and how it all played out. Sometimes, life doesn't give you a chance to choose between two bad options. Anyway, lesson learned, always call your mom back right away. Or at the very least, check the urgency level before ignoring it at a wedding. TIFU by accidentally sending a private, embarrassing text to my boss, and now I'm trying to figure out how to recover. So, it all started on a typical Tuesday morning. I work at a fairly large tech company, and while my team is small, we have a number of cross-departmental projects that require a lot of communication. A few days earlier, I had been going back and forth with my boss about a project timeline and some changes we needed to implement. Nothing too out of the ordinary, just regular work stuff. My boss, let's call him Rick, is a really laid-back guy. Super easygoing, but still very much a no-nonsense leader when it comes to meeting deadlines and maintaining professional boundaries. Anyway, I'm the kind of person who likes to keep things light with my colleagues. We joke around a lot in our team chats, and sometimes those jokes spill into personal conversations, which isn't always the best. But my close friends and I have a texting group that gets pretty wild. There's a good mix of banter, sarcasm, and memes that we toss around, mostly when we're avoiding work or when things get really boring at the office. On this particular day, the office was particularly slow. It was one of those rare moments where everyone was either in meetings or working remotely, and I was just sitting there, half-heartedly tackling some mundane task. At some point, I decided to check my phone, something I do on occasion, just to see if anything urgent came up. And of course, it was flooded with messages from my friends, mostly memes, inside jokes, and general nonsense. I had just finished replying to a particularly funny meme when I saw that I had a text from Rick, my boss. He had sent me a message about a quick follow-up on the project we were working on. He was asking me to clarify a couple of things, and honestly, it was pretty straightforward. I was in the middle of reading his text, thinking of my response when something strange happened. My phone vibrated again, and I instinctively unlocked it to check. It was another message from the group chat. Now, here's where things started to go wrong. In my attempt to multitask, I accidentally clicked the wrong conversation. Instead of replying to Rick's work-related message, I ended up opening the group chat with my friends. Without thinking, I typed my usual sarcastic response. Rick is such a control freak. I can't stand how micromanaging he is. I swear he breathes down my neck for every little thing. What nightmare. I then hit send, thinking it was going to my friends. But it wasn't. I froze as I saw the little notification pop up. Message sent to Rick. My heart immediately dropped into my stomach. Time seemed to slow down as I realized what I had just done. I had sent an incredibly unprofessional and rude comment about my boss directly to my boss. Not just about him, but calling him a control freak and a micromanager, the two things that any boss would be mortally offended by, especially when you consider that we were having a perfectly civil, professional conversation only minutes before. I stared at my phone screen, my mind racing, my palms sweaty. There was no undo button. No, hey, can I just pretend that didn't happen? The message was out there, and it had already been delivered. Panic set in. I immediately thought about how to recover from this disaster. Should I apologize? Should I play it cool and pretend it was a joke? Should I just quit my job and move to a remote island? The options felt endless, but none of them seemed like a good fit. After a few moments of sheer panic, I decided the best course of action would be to address it directly. I immediately typed out a follow-up message to Rick. Hey Rick, I just realized what I sent, and I need to apologize. That message was intended for a personal chat with a friend and was absolutely inappropriate. I meant no disrespect whatsoever. I know that came off very poorly, and I genuinely appreciate the way you managed the team. I debated sending it for a minute. What if it made things worse? But then again, what other choice did I have? I couldn't just ignore it or hope he didn't notice. I hit send and waited. For the longest 30 seconds of my life, nothing happened. I kept staring at my phone, expecting it to buzz with a furious response or an "Are you serious?" message. Instead, Rick replied with a simple, "No problem. Let's get back to work." I felt a wave of relief flood through me, but I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. Sure, he didn't flip out, but what did he really think? Was this going to change how he viewed me? Had I just ruined my career? My mind was spinning with worst-case scenarios. The rest of the day went on without much more drama, but I couldn't shake the anxiety. Every time Rick popped into the office, I felt like he was looking at me differently. Was he pretending it didn't bother him? The next day, Rick called me into his office for a quick chat. My stomach dropped. I had a full-on anxiety attack walking into that room, ready to face the music. But when I sat down, Rick didn't bring up the message at all. Instead, he handed me a coffee mug and said, "Hey, I just wanted to make sure you're doing okay. Sometimes work gets really stressful, and I know we're all dealing with a lot. I appreciate your honesty yesterday, and don't worry, it happens to the best of us." I was in shock. He wasn't mad. He wasn't angry. He didn't even bring up the whole text situation. I just nodded and thanked him, still a little stunned by how calm he was about it. It turns out, I dodged a bullet, but I also learned a valuable lesson. Never mix work with personal chat, especially when you're in the middle of a conversation with your boss. Even if your boss is chill, you never know when the wrong message might slip through. It took a while for me to fully relax after that incident, but looking back, I'm just thankful Rick handled it with such grace. I think we can all agree that technology makes it too easy to mess up in ways we didn't even think were possible. So yeah, that was my TIFU. At least I didn't lose my job over it, but I've definitely learned to double-check who I'm texting before hitting send. TIFU by accidentally deleting my entire work project on the day it was due, and how it led to a total meltdown. So, this happened just yesterday, and I'm still reeling from the fallout. I'm in my late 20s and work as a digital marketing strategist at a fairly large agency. For the past month, I've been working on this massive campaign for a high-profile client. We were about to launch, and I had just finished finalizing everything, including a comprehensive report, a presentation, and a series of social media posts. The report was huge. I had to go through hundreds of pages of market research, create performance forecasts, and include in-depth analyses of consumer behavior trends. It wasn't just a typical write a few paragraphs type of report. This was something I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into. It was my magnum opus as far as my career was concerned, and I was feeling really good about it. Anyway, the big day was coming up, and I was running a little behind schedule. It was crunch time, so I decided to spend the entire night finalizing everything. I wasn't worried about it because I had already backed everything up to a cloud storage service and to my external hard drive. Or so I thought. Around 2 a.m., after a solid 12-hour workday, I finished making my last edits to the report and decided it was time for a quick break. I was going to go make some tea to clear my head before doing a final review. This is where my mistake happened, and let me tell you, it was one of those if I could go back in time moments. I thought it would be a good idea to clean up my desktop while I was taking a break. Just delete some unnecessary files, get rid of some old documents that were taking up space, and generally make things look a little less cluttered. I'm a naturally disorganized person, and I was tired of seeing the same mess on my screen every day. So I started clicking through old files, sending them to the trash bin. I was in the zone, deleting files without thinking too much. The document I had been working on for weeks, let's call it Campaign Report Final Draft, was sitting right there on my desktop, and I thought it was an old version I had already saved. Without a second thought, I clicked on it and hit delete. Here's the problem. That wasn't an old version. That was the final, fully edited, client-ready report I was about to present. The one that I had just finished moments before my tea break. Now, this is where things start to spiral. I noticed immediately that something was wrong. My heart sank as I looked at the trash bin on my screen. The file was gone. Gone. I panicked and immediately tried to restore it. But of course, it wasn't in the trash bin. I don't know why it didn't save to the bin. Maybe because it was too large or something, but the point is, it was nowhere to be found. I rushed to my cloud storage and checked to see if I had a backup. Of course, I hadn't uploaded the latest version. I had only uploaded the rough drafts from days ago when I was still working on parts of the analysis. I stared at the screen in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. The report was gone, and it wasn't anywhere in my backups. This wasn't just a small mistake. This was a career-defining catastrophe. At this point, I was freaking out. I knew that the presentation was due in just a few hours, and there was no way I could recreate everything from scratch in such a short amount of time. I had already spent the better part of the month compiling data, writing detailed insights, and designing the layout. This was a massive project, and it was all on the line now. My first instinct was to call my boss, but I didn't know how to explain it. Hey, so I accidentally deleted everything I've worked on for the past month. Sorry about that. That didn't seem like a conversation I wanted to have. So I did what any reasonable person would do in a panic. I tried to recover the file myself. I downloaded every file recovery tool I could find. I spent hours scanning my hard drive for traces of the deleted report. I wasn't getting anywhere. Every file recovery attempt seemed to show old, irrelevant files, but not the one I needed. It was a nightmare. By now, it was 6 a.m., and the report was due in less than 4 hours. I hadn't slept. My mind was racing, and I felt like I was trapped in a time loop of failure. I had no choice but to break the news to my boss. My fingers hovered over the phone for what felt like an eternity, but finally I dialed her number. Hey, I need to tell you something. I screwed up. Big time. She picked up, and I explained what had happened in as calm a voice as I could muster. I could hear the concern in her voice as she asked for more details, and I gave them to her, every painful, excruciating detail. To my surprise, she didn't yell at me or reprimand me immediately. Instead, she said she'd give me some time to recover the file. That's when I realized I had underestimated her level of professionalism. She was already trying to help me find a solution rather than jumping straight into panic mode. I'll spare you the details of the next several hours, but after relentless attempts at data recovery and realizing that I had no hope of retrieving the file, I came up with a last-ditch effort. I decided to redo the entire thing. From scratch. I didn't have the luxury of time, but I couldn't afford to give up either. I pulled all the data and research from my memory, pieced together what I could from old drafts and notes, and reworked the analysis in a frantic blur of stress and caffeine. I sent the new report to my boss just as the deadline hit, and though it wasn't perfect, she seemed impressed by how quickly I managed to put it together. I was exhausted, but I'd managed to scrape by. When I finally spoke with her later that afternoon, she thanked me for getting it done and even praised my work ethic. I couldn't believe she was being so understanding. In the end, everything worked out, and the campaign went live without any major hitches. However, I learned a valuable lesson that day. Backups aren't just for when you feel like doing them. They're essential. Now, I've set up a solid backup system, and I make sure to double-check everything before I hit delete. But yeah, that was the day I nearly ruined my entire career. So, to anyone reading this, always back up your work and never delete anything without being absolutely sure it's the right file. Trust me, the consequences are way worse than you can imagine. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.